Bitterness lingered on the tongue and in the truth. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments make these mysteries come alive. Let's begin. If you ever want to test how much a man values peace, try slipping a chocolatier into his living room before lunch. I don't recommend it, unless you're eager to see veins rise on Nero Wolfe's forehead like cables under tension. But that's exactly what happened on a Wednesday morning that was otherwise scheduled for orchids, silence, and Fritz's invention of a cocoa mousse Wolfe swore would redefine confectionery orthodoxy. The day began peacefully enough. Wolfe had declared, between mouthfuls of eggs à la Russe, that he would refuse all clients until further notice. He claimed the world was glutted with idiocy and that his threshold for tolerating it had expired. Words that, in my experience, meant at least 2 clients would appear within the week. I was halfway through balancing the monthly expenses when the bell rang. Now, ordinarily, I'd have let Fritz answer it. But curiosity is a chronic condition with me, and the ring had a certain quality. Hesitant, expensive, like someone unused to pushing their own buttons. Standing at the door was a man of about 40, slim, pale, and dressed in what you might call restrained elegance. The kind that tries not to shout money, but ends up whispering it anyway. He introduced himself as Gordon Vale, proprietor of Vale Chocolaterie, supplier to New York's higher calories and finer consciences. He was holding a small square box tied with a deep red ribbon. "Mr. Wolfe," he said once I'd ushered him into the office, "is a man who appreciates purity. I've brought him a sample of mine." That was his opener. Smooth as ganache. Wolfe didn't look up from the magazine he was pretending to read. "If you intend to peddle wares," he said, "you may address your proposition to Mr. Goodwin, who is regrettably more patient with commerce than I." Vale smiled. "I'm not here to sell chocolate, Mr. Wolfe. I'm here because someone is trying to destroy me. With it." Now that got Wolfe's eyes off the page. Slowly, he closed the magazine, the way a judge might close a verdict. "Explain." Vale sat, uninvited but deliberate, and placed the box on Wolfe's desk as though it contained something alive. 3 weeks ago, we launched a new signature bar. Noir Sublime, 72% cacao, single origin, hand-tempered. It's been my life's work, but in the past week, 3 of my most prominent clients have received anonymous letters claiming our chocolate is contaminated, with traces of narcotics. He paused, watching Wolfe's eyebrows climb a fraction of an inch. There's no truth to it, of course. The FDA tested us last year, but the letters are specific, detailed, and, well, credible enough that 2 distributors have frozen their orders. Someone's sabotaging us, and I've come to you to find out who. I could have told him he'd come to the right place for finding things out and the wrong one for fast action. Wolfe tapped his fingers on the armrest. "You've gone to the police?" "Yes." They shrugged. "No crime," they said, "until someone's poisoned or dies." "Idiots," Wolfe muttered. "Continue." Vale explained that his company had only a handful of key employees, 5 to be exact, all with access to the product's formula and its marketing rollout, and all, conveniently, with motives that could pass for ambition or revenge depending on your flavor. I was beginning to like the setup, a sabotage with style, a crime without corpses, and, judging by Wolfe's frown, one that scratched an intellectual itch he'd been pretending not to have. "You may leave the box," Wolfe finally said. "Archie will examine its contents, though I insist he refrain from devouring them until instructed." "That'll be a challenge," I said. Vale gave me a brief smile before taking his hat and leaving as quietly as he'd arrived. When the door shut, Wolfe stared at the red-ribboned box as if it were a moral dilemma in edible form. "Archie," he said, "there is mischief in this." "Chocolate mischief?" He ignored me. "A campaign of defamation requires subtlety, calculation, and knowledge of human appetite. Find the 5 people closest to Vale's enterprise. Speak to them. I'll hear your report before dinner. I raised an eyebrow. You're taking the case? He leaned back, closing his eyes. I am not. I'm tasting it. And just like that, the piece of the brownstone melted into something rich, dark, and suspiciously bitter. I don't claim to have seen everything, but I can tell you that nothing rearranges the molecular structure of the brownstone faster than a new client's scent lingering in Wolfe's office. It's like throwing a foreign chemical into a controlled experiment. When Gordon Vale left that morning, the air was thick with cocoa and curiosity. Wolfe sat still, fingers steepled, eyes closed, thinking. Fritz peeked in once, caught sight of the chocolate box on Wolfe's desk, and retreated as if he'd seen a bear trap baited with truffles. For the next 10 minutes, no sound broke the silence except the faint hum of Wolfe's chair leather whenever he shifted. He was thinking, an activity he performed with the intensity of a court in session and the patience of a glacier. I busied myself cataloguing Vale's tone, expressions, and the peculiar detail that his shoes had been freshly polished, but his cuffs frayed. Either he'd been under pressure lately, or he'd worn that suit one time too many for meetings with investors. Finally, Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, the list, he said. That meant he'd already decided what I'd be doing for the rest of the day. I drew my notebook and pencil. Vale mentioned 5 people with access. I'll need names. You'll need more than that, Wolfe said. You'll need an understanding of their temperaments, ambitions, and recent disappointments. People do not defame without reason. They do so from a wound. I called Vale, who answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting for permission to exhale. He gave me the names, one by one, each with a brief, clipped description that sounded rehearsed. Diana Merle, operations manager, efficient, immaculate, with a temper Vale described as low-boiling but constant. Arthur Kells, head of marketing, smooth talker, recently denied a profit-sharing bonus. Helen Jaspers, chocolatier and product developer, Vale's oldest associate, but lately at odds with him over creative direction. Troy Bender, financial officer, numbers man, quiet, serious, and possibly too aware of the company's declining margins. Celeste Vale, the younger sister, nominally in charge of brand outreach, which sounded more like an excuse to keep her on the payroll. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were still half closed. You will begin with Miss Merle, he said. Any reason? She is described as constant. Constancy is often mistaken for loyalty. That error breeds peril. It was classic Wolfe logic. Impeccable, impenetrable, and, more often than not, correct. By 2 o'clock, I was standing in the Vale Chocolaterie headquarters, a gleaming 2-story suite in the Flatiron district that smelled like temptation under fluorescent light. The reception area was pure theater, warm lighting, brass accents, and a glass case of chocolate samples laid out like jewels. If sin had a storefront, this would be it. Miss Diana Merle looked exactly how I'd pictured her. Sharp as a scalpel, late 30s, eyes that could slice through excuses. She met me in a small conference room, offered me water, and declined to sit until I did. You're with Nero Wolfe, she said. That's right, I said, flashing my most trustworthy grin. Just trying to clear up some confusion before it melts into trouble. Her lips tightened. Then you should be talking to Gordon, not to me. I'm here to keep this place running, not gossip. I gave her the kind of smile that tends to loosen tight lips. Let's call it professional curiosity. You've been with Vale the longest? 5 years. Like him? She tilted her head. I respect him. That's rarer. I noted the phrasing, respect, not affection, a faint but significant distinction in Wolfe's vocabulary of motives. I pressed a little. Any recent changes? Disagreements? People unhappy. Her eyes flicked toward the glass door. You think someone here did this? Wolfe doesn't think anything. He observes. I just ask questions and get yelled at later. A small smile cracked her professionalism. If someone is behind those letters, they're smarter than I'd like to admit. The claims were precise, the sort of details only an insider would know, not random poison pen nonsense. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. If you're looking for discontent, talk to Arthur Kells. He's been grumbling since that bonus dispute. He's ambitious, clever, and careless in equal measure. When I left her office, I had a note in my pocket and the faint impression that Diana Merle didn't dislike Vale, but she might not bleed chocolate for him either. Arthur Kells's office was down the hall, a glass-walled shrine to self-promotion. Posters of advertising campaigns covered the walls, and a decanter of scotch gleamed on the corner table like a confession waiting for a priest. Kells was lounging behind his desk, tie loose, grin wide. Archie Goodwin, right? I've heard of you. You're Wolfe's guy, the one who actually does things. That's me. You're the one who actually markets things. He laughed. Touché. So Gordon's called in the great detective. That means he's worried. Should he be? I asked. About me? Only if success offends him. I've been keeping this brand alive while he hides behind tempering machines. He poured himself a drink. You know, he promised me a cut of the Noir Sublime profits. Then he pulled it back, said the timing wasn't right. He's lucky I believe in the product more than the man. Interesting way to show faith, I said. He raised his glass. Faith without leverage is just charity. When I left Kells, I felt the atmosphere of the place had shifted. Something tense, coiled, like a simmer under sweetness. In the elevator mirror, I caught my own reflection and thought how Wolfe would be sitting now, serene and smug, knowing I'd find just enough friction to interest him. I spent the next 2 hours meeting Helen Jaspers, who carried an artist's irritation like a perfume, and Troy Bender, whose polite restraint was a little too polished for comfort. Celeste Vale, the sister, was last, a striking brunette who greeted me with warmth and a question that almost sounded rehearsed. Did Gordon send you to keep me quiet? That one hit my ears like a wrong note. When I returned to the brownstone that evening, Fritz was plating something involving more butter than sense, and Wolfe was where I'd left him, rooted in his chair, serene as a Buddha with a bank account. He didn't look up as I walked in. Well? I set my notebook on the desk. Your suspects are a mixed box. Half sweet, half bitter. And at least one of them's hiding something sticky. Wolfe exhaled slowly. Good. The flavor develops. He opened the red box at last, lifting the lid like a priest uncovering relics. Inside were 6 glossy, dark squares of chocolate, each wrapped in gold foil, perfectly symmetrical. He unwrapped one, sniffed it, and placed it on the edge of his desk without tasting it. Then, softly, he said, Archie, something has already been here. I frowned. You mean? He nodded toward the box. A substitution, one piece slightly off-center. Whoever tampered with this has been in this room today. And just like that, the brownstone was no longer a refuge. It had been breached. For a man who hated disruption more than taxation, finding that his office had been quietly invaded was like discovering someone had put vinegar in his beer. Wolfe's eyes stayed on that open box of chocolates as though it were a murder weapon in silk gloves. I waited for an explosion, but none came. Instead, his voice, soft, clipped, too calm, cut through the air. Archie, he said, bring me the magnifier from the drawer. I obeyed. He tilted the lid toward the light, peering over the rim of his nose. Observe, he murmured. The alignment of the wrappers. 5 pristine, 1 refolded. The foil bears a faint impression inconsistent with factory sealing. Meaning someone opened it? I asked. meaning someone handled it after it left Vale's possession. That was enough to make me check the locks, though I already knew there wasn't a scratch on them. Wolfe's office might as well have been Fort Knox. Still, if someone had managed to sneak into the brownstone, that wasn't a trivial matter. It was an act of heresy. He waved a hand. "No theatrics, Archie. We are not invaded by burglars. Whoever tampered with this had purpose, not greed, and subtlety." I leaned on the desk. "Someone from Vale's circle, you think?" "Possibly. Or someone who wishes us to believe so." He folded the foil back with delicate fingers and gave a faint snort. "Our visitor was precise, but not infallible. They replaced one chocolate with another of slightly lesser density. Fritz will confirm. He has a palate that could shame a chemist." I went to fetch Fritz from the kitchen. The smell of roasted garlic and butter was enough to make any man reconsider his career path. But Fritz came willingly, apron immaculate, expression tight with curiosity. He approached the desk, sniffed the chocolates, and hesitated over the sixth piece. "This one," he said finally, "is wrong. Slightly bitter, less cocoa butter. Not ours, not Mr. Vale's. A cheaper coverture, perhaps domestic." Wolfe nodded, satisfied. "As I suspected. Archie, you will deliver this impostor to Dr. Vollmer tomorrow for chemical analysis. Tonight you will ensure that every entrance and window is secure. Someone has trespassed not for theft, but for message." "What kind of message?" He frowned. "That I am being watched, which is intolerable." He dismissed me with a flick of his fingers and leaned back, closing his eyes again. The picture of a man who preferred strategy to sleep. I spent the next hour checking locks, the basement hatch, even the greenhouse corridor. Nothing. Whoever had entered the brownstone had done so without leaving a whisper. By 10, the house was quiet except for the low hum of Wolfe's thoughts. I'd seen that look before, the one that meant he was building a structure of deduction, brick by brick. I left him there and went to my room, but the thought of that one misplaced chocolate nagged at me like a bad tune. The next morning, Dr. Vollmer confirmed Wolfe's suspicion. The substituted chocolate contained not narcotics, but trace amounts of caffeine and a stabilizer compound rarely used in high-end production. It was a copy, a good one, but still counterfeit. Wolfe's lips compressed into a thin line when I reported it. "So the saboteur wishes to mimic the fraud he accuses Vale of," I said. "Smart. Smart," Wolfe agreed, "and dangerous. He, or she, possesses both technical skill and audacity. Someone who moves easily in both worlds, industry and deceit." He rose, an event as rare as a solar eclipse, and went to the wall safe. I knew better than to comment. From it, he withdrew a single folded sheet of paper sealed with his own mark. He handed it to me. "You will deliver this to Mr. Vale in person. Do not read it. You will observe his reaction. Note every word, every flicker." I took it and asked, "You're baiting him already?" He smiled faintly. A good confectioner must know how heat transforms the material. I left shortly after noon. Vale's office looked even more stressed than before. Phones ringing, assistants whispering, a tension that smelled of fear and cocoa. He met me in his private room, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. I handed him Wolfe's note. He tore it open, scanned it, and paled slightly. He wants me to deliver another sample, to him, directly." "That's right," I said. "Sealed, untouched, and personally wrapped by your hand. He also wants your assurance that no one else will know of this delivery." Vale hesitated, rubbing his temples. "He's right to be cautious. Someone's watching us. Yesterday I found my office door ajar after hours. Nothing missing, just wrong. That got my attention. Who else has keys?" "Only Diana, Troy, and Helen." "Not your sister?" He looked up sharply. "Celeste?" "No. She's been staying in Connecticut since Monday." "Why?" I shrugged. "Just asking. Wolfe likes complete lists." As I left, I caught sight of Arthur Kells in the hallway, arguing with a distributor on the phone, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. When he saw me, he smiled, a little too easily. "How's the great detective taking his sweets?" "Carefully," I said. "He has a sensitive stomach for lies." That wiped the grin off him. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms with Theodore, inspecting orchids. He rarely left his sanctum during an investigation, but this was his form of thinking, observing something orderly when the world turned chaotic. When I told him Vale's reaction, he nodded. Expected. Fear mixed with vanity. He believes he is the target. He does not yet consider he may be the cause. I dropped into my chair. "Meaning what? You think he's staging the whole thing?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that the letters, the sabotage, and the trespass are not distinct acts but orchestrated movements. Someone is shaping perception, not seeking gain, to destroy Vale's reputation or his conscience." "Conscience." He looked at me then, eyes sharp as glass. "Archie, every obsession conceals a guilt. Vale's devotion to purity of chocolate may mask an impurity of conduct. We will find which." Before I could reply, the phone rang. I picked it up, and a woman's voice came through, strained and breathless. "This is Helen Jaspers," she said. I shouldn't be calling, but you need to tell Mr. Wolfe. Something's happened. Gordon Vale, he collapsed at the factory half an hour ago." That snapped Wolfe upright in his chair. For the first time since the case began, his composure cracked, just enough to show urgency. "Alive?" he demanded. "Barely," she said. "But he was eating one of the Noir Sublime bars when it happened." I hung up and met Wolfe's gaze. "So much," I said, "for a harmless box of chocolates." His eyes narrowed. "Archie, summon Saul Panzer. The flavor has turned fatal." The ambulance siren still rang in my ears long after I hung up the phone. Wolfe didn't move for a full 10 seconds, which is a long time in Wolfe's clock. Then he inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring slightly, the way they do when he smells deceit instead of orchids. He spoke low and clear. "Archie, get your coat. You'll go to the hospital. Confirm Mr. Vale's condition, gather every observable fact, and speak to no one else until you return." That kind of instruction from Wolfe isn't a request. Within 10 minutes, I was in a cab, weaving through traffic toward Mount Sinai. The city outside blurred into a dull gray smear of motion and horns. My mind, meanwhile, was busy sorting through possibilities. Vale's collapse might have been coincidence, a weak heart, a bad lunch. But coincidence is a currency Wolfe refuses to spend. When I reached the hospital, Vale was in the intensive ward, unconscious but stable. I flashed Wolfe's name at the nurse. Wolfe's reputation works faster than any badge, and got the details. Vale had been at the factory, running a tasting session for a new distributor. According to the assistant who'd called the ambulance, he'd sampled one of the Noir Sublime bars, coughed, staggered, and collapsed within seconds. No one else who tasted the same batch suffered a thing. The doctors suspected a chemical irritant, something sharp enough to induce shock, but too subtle to be easily traced. I didn't need to be a genius to connect that to the substituted chocolate back at the brownstone. The method was consistent, something small, deliberate, designed to imitate an existing product. Someone was poisoning Vale's world from the inside, one bite at a time. After a few more questions and a polite shove from a doctor who didn't like loitering detectives, I headed back to the brownstone. When I entered, Fritz was setting out the dinner service, coq au vin and a scowl that said he didn't like illness intruding on mealtime. Wolfe was at his desk again, serene, as if the world hadn't tilted. "Well?" he asked. "Alive but out cold," I said. "Doctor thinks it was a chemical agent, maybe an irritant. No one else got sick. They all ate from the same batch." Wolfe grunted. predictable. The attack was personal, not industrial. It was meant for Vale alone. That's your read? He nodded. Someone wanted him silenced before he could react to my note. That made my scalp prickle. You think the letter spooked them into acting? I think, Wolfe said, his eyes half-lidded, that the letter precipitated the next move in a game already underway. We have flushed the adversary into the open. I sat across from him. All right. Suppose we're dealing with one of the five. Who's got the access, the nerve, and the timing? Each of them, Wolfe said, in varying degrees. But access alone does not compel action. Ambition, fear, or love. Those are the catalysts. Tell me again, what did Miss Jaspers sound like when she called? I replayed her voice in my head. Shaky, scared, genuine, or an excellent imitation of genuine. Panicked, I said. Not staged. Perhaps, Wolfe murmured. But sincerity is not proof. It is often strategy. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I went to answer and found Saul Panzer, trench coat damp from the drizzle, expression calm as ever. Wolfe had summoned him to the case before I'd even left for the hospital. Proof, as always, that the fat man's foresight beats most people's hindsight. Wolfe didn't bother with greetings. Saul, our field of engagement has expanded. Gordon Vale has been poisoned. We must now determine whether it was meant to kill or to frighten. Either motive reveals identity. Saul nodded. You have a suspect list? 5, I said. 4 employees and a sister, each with motive, opportunity, and apparently bad taste in timing. Wolfe gestured toward me. Archie will provide their particulars. You will verify their whereabouts this afternoon, between 2 and 4. Begin with Miss Celeste Vale. She was reportedly in Connecticut. Confirm. Saul took notes without comment. When he left, the room fell silent again except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Wolfe leaned back, hands folded across his chest. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Inform him of Vale's condition, but omit our involvement in the analysis. Let him bark at the hospital walls a while. I did as told. Kramer's voice came through like gravel and suspicion. Goodwin, if you and Wolfe are sniffing around another corpse that ain't a corpse yet, I want to know why. Because it might be one soon, I said. That earned me a muttered oath and a promise to send a man to watch Vale's room. I hung up and turned back to Wolfe. Kramer's not happy, I said. Nor am I, Wolfe replied, but happiness is irrelevant. What matters is sequence. Whoever tampered with the chocolate here wanted us to recognize it. That implies observation. If our intruder has eyes on this house, he will know Vale still lives by morning. Expect escalation. That didn't thrill me. I checked the window blinds. You're saying he's watching us now? I am saying, Wolfe said slowly, that whoever entered here before will attempt to do so again. This house is both bait and trap. It was just after 9 when the call came, Saul's voice on the line, low and steady. I've checked them all. Celeste Vale wasn't in Connecticut. She checked into the Belmont Hotel yesterday afternoon. Registered alone. Wolfe's eyes flickered open. Excellent. Where is she now? Still there. But she had a visitor an hour ago, Arthur Kells. That drew a faint smile from Wolfe, the kind that meant the pieces were beginning to fit. 2 birds in one cage, he said softly. Archie, you will visit them, casually, of course. Observe what binds them, business, affection, or conspiracy. Do not engage. Merely note. I stood, grabbed my hat. And if they notice I'm tailing them? Then, Wolfe said, you will have confirmed my hypothesis that guilt craves an audience. The Belmont wasn't far, and it didn't take long to find the pair. Through the bar's glass wall, I spotted Kells and Celeste at a cornered table, heads close, her hand gripping his wrist in a way that spelled either fear or regret. They were talking too fast for comfort. I couldn't hear the words, but I caught the tone, a mix of urgency and pleading. Then she shook her head sharply and stood, leaving him mid-sentence. I followed her out discreetly. She went straight to a phone booth, dialed, and spoke for less than a minute. When she came out, her face was pale, and she clutched her purse like it contained evidence. She turned south toward the subway. I could have followed her, but Wolfe's rule about merely note was ironclad. So I stayed with Kells instead. He sat there for 5 minutes, then rose and left through the side door. I tailed him 2 blocks before he stopped abruptly, turned, and gave me a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Goodwin," he said, "you should tell your boss to stop sniffing around ghosts. Sometimes they bite." Then he disappeared into a cab. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, a brandy untouched beside him. I relayed everything. He listened without interruption, only nodding once when I mentioned Celeste's call. "Did you note the booth number?" he asked. "Yeah, Grand Street and 7th. "Good, I shall. Have Fritz inquire tomorrow who received that call." He closed his eyes again, murmuring almost to himself. Kells and Celeste, ambition and inheritance. Vale's illness accelerates both their fortunes, yet too crude a collaboration. Someone else directs the tempo. I poured myself a drink. "Then who's the conductor?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, "Whoever replaced that chocolate wanted me to taste their craft. A rival intellect, Archie, and I despise rivals." Outside, the rain had begun to fall again, tapping against the windows like someone testing the locks. The rain persisted through the night, a slow, steady whisper against the windows that made the brownstone feel like an island afloat on grey water. Wolfe stayed up later than usual. Later meaning 11:30. His eyes narrowed in thought, while I sat across from him with a cup of coffee that had gone from hot to hopeless. He hadn't spoken for 15 minutes, which meant he was either composing a verbal firing squad or constructing the scaffolding of a deduction. When he finally did speak, it was as quiet as the rain. "Archie, tomorrow we will invite Miss Celeste Vale to visit at 11 o'clock sharp. You will call her early, before she has the chance to confer with Mr. Kells or anyone else." "You planning to ask her about her late-night chat with him?" I asked. He made a face, which in Wolfe's language meant that my question was the equivalent of asking a mathematician whether 2 + 2 still made 4. "I plan," he said, "to observe how she lies about it." I grinned. "And if she doesn't?" "Then she's either innocent or more dangerous than I had hoped." I left him to his orchids and went to bed. Sleep didn't stick. Something about the look on Kells's face when he told me ghosts bite kept floating back up. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed but uneasy. I called Celeste Vale at 8:15 sharp. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice cool and controlled. "Mr. Goodwin, is this about my brother?" "In a manner of speaking," I said. "Mr. Wolfe would appreciate a few minutes of your time. 11 o'clock. He promises not to make you eat anything." A pause, faintly suspicious. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll make him curious, which is worse." That earned a sigh. "Fine. 11. When I hung up, Fritz was already fussing with the table settings for breakfast, and Wolfe had just descended from the plant rooms, moving as if gravity were optional. He accepted his coffee without comment. I gave him the update. "She'll come," I said. "Of course," he murmured. Curiosity is a lure more potent than guilt. By the time Celeste arrived, the house smelled of eggs, thyme, and inevitability. She was punctual to the minute, elegantly dressed and visibly guarded. Wolfe didn't rise to greet her. He merely gestured to the red chair opposite his desk. She sat, crossing her legs in a gesture that was all confidence and no comfort. "I understand," she began, "that you've been asking questions about my brother's business. I hope you're not planning to publish anything." That almost made me laugh. "We're not the press, Miss Vale," I said. We only print the truth when it serves justice. Her eyes shifted to Wolfe. And what exactly are you hoping to find, Mr. Wolfe? The origin of a lie, he said calmly. Your brother's illness, the counterfeit chocolate, the letters, all components of one design. Someone seeks to annihilate his reputation and possibly his person. The question is whether you are participant or pawn. Her chin lifted a fraction. I've done nothing but try to protect Gordon. He wouldn't listen when I told him to scale back the launch. He was too proud, too sure that Noir Sublime would save him. Save him from what? Wolfe asked. She hesitated. Debt, legal trouble. You must know, Vale Chocolaterie isn't as solvent as it appears. Gordon mortgaged the family estate last year to cover expansion. If the Noir Sublime failed, we'd lose everything. That was new. I shot Wolfe a glance, but his expression didn't flicker. He leaned back slightly. And who besides you knew of this precarious situation? Everyone, she said bitterly. They could all see the stress. He confided in Helen Jaspers. She's practically family, and Troy Bender handled the accounts. Diana and Arthur heard enough to draw their own conclusions. Yet, Wolfe said softly, you neglected to mention this yesterday when Mr. Goodwin spoke with you. I was frightened, she said. I didn't know what to think. And Arthur, he said... She stopped herself. Too late. Mr. Kells, Wolfe prompted. Said what? Her voice dropped. That it was already too late, that someone had set a trap for Gordon, and all we could do was stay clear of it. I stepped forward. Did he name names? No. But he looked terrified when he said it. I think he knows who's behind this. Wolfe's eyes opened fully now, sharp as drawn steel. Or he is who's behind this. Mr. Goodwin, you will summon Mr. Kells here this evening at 6 o'clock. Use whatever pretext you prefer. I wish to test the limits of his imagination. Celeste looked uneasy. Should I stay? No, Wolfe said. You have already provided more than you intended. Go home, Miss Vale, and refrain from calling anyone until tomorrow. I would not wish your caution to wane. After she left, Wolfe exhaled heavily, a rare admission of irritation. This is a study in artifice, Archie. The letters, the substitution, the poisoning, all performances. The true author remains unseen, using others as brush strokes. I said, if Kells shows up, maybe we'll see who's holding the brush. At 6 sharp, Kells arrived, too neatly dressed, too confident, the kind of man who thinks swagger makes armor. He didn't bother hiding his contempt for the setting. Still playing detective, Wolfe. I thought you preferred reading cookbooks. Wolfe's lips curved slightly. An unkind remark, Mr. Kells. I assure you, my appetite extends beyond gastronomy. You have been busy, visiting Miss Vale, speaking with distributors, managing rumors. Admirable multitasking for a man under scrutiny. Kells bristled. I have nothing to hide. I'm trying to keep the company alive while Gordon lies in a hospital bed. Indeed. And in doing so, you've positioned yourself as interim decision-maker, haven't you? Access to funds, inventory, contracts. A convenient station if one were inclined toward opportunism. Are you accusing me? I never accuse, Wolfe said mildly. I only observe, and I observe a man motivated not by greed, but by resentment. Your promised profit share was rescinded. You were humiliated. Retaliation disguised as salvation. Yes, that fits you well. Kells leaned forward, face flushed. You have no proof. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. Not yet, but proof is merely evidence that has been cornered, and I assure you, you will corner yourself soon. Kells stood abruptly, muttered something unprintable, and stalked out. I turned to Wolfe. You wanted to provoke him? Of course. Rage loosens lips faster than persuasion. Saul will shadow him tonight. We shall see whom he meets, and what instructions he follows. Before I could answer, the phone rang again. I picked it up. Fritz's voice, low and urgent, came from the kitchen extension. Mr. Goodwin? Someone just left an envelope at the door. No one was there when I looked. I brought it in. Wolfe took it, slit the seal with a silver knife, and unfolded a single sheet. His eyes scanned the words, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine surprise flicker across his face. "Archie," he said quietly. "Read this." It was typed, no signature, just 5 words. "The next piece is yours." He looked up, and his voice was colder than the rain outside. "Archie," he said, "we are no longer merely observers. We are the target." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking on Wolfe's wall. He sat perfectly still, the paper resting between his fingers, eyes unfocused, not in confusion, but in calculation. The note, short as it was, carried the weight of something personal. I'd seen Wolfe get angry before, but this wasn't that. This was colder, controlled, the kind of stillness that comes right before a verdict. I waited for him to speak. When he didn't, I asked, "You think it's real? Or just another scare tactic?" "It is real," he said finally. "Because it is elegant. Whoever composed this knows economy of language and understands me well enough to know that simplicity provokes me more than insult. Archie, we are dealing with a mind I might almost respect, were it not so contemptible." He passed me the note again. "Study it. The typeface is a Remington, old model, slightly misaligned on the E. Common enough, but the phrasing, it implies sequence. The next piece suggests continuation. They are writing a story, and we are now its subjects." I examined the paper. "You think this person's got another move planned?" "Undoubtedly," Wolfe said. "And soon. They intend not only to endanger us, but to display their craft in doing so. Vanity, Archie, is always the softest underbelly of intellect." He called for Fritz, who arrived still holding a kitchen towel. Wolfe handed him the envelope carefully. "Preserve this, Fritz. Do not touch the contents with bare hands. Place it in the metal box in the pantry. Archie, tomorrow morning you will take it to Inspector Kramer." That was Wolfe's idea of sharing. I could already hear Kramer's growl echoing in my head. The rest of the evening went by in silence. Wolfe refused to discuss theories, which meant he had one forming and didn't want to bruise it by talking. I left him to it and checked the house again. All windows locked, doors bolted, the garden gate chained. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever left that envelope had done so from closer than the sidewalk. The thought of someone standing at our door in the dark, just watching, was enough to make even the brownstone feel smaller. The next morning broke gray and heavy. Kramer didn't appreciate being summoned before his first coffee, but the note got his attention faster than caffeine. He came stomping into Wolfe's office just before 10, his overcoat dripping and his patience non-existent. "What's this about someone threatening you, Wolfe?" he barked. "I've got a poisoned chocolatier on life support, and now you want protection detail." "I want competence," Wolfe replied evenly. "Protection is optional." Kramer shot me a look. He's in one of his moods again. "When is he not?" I said. Kramer leaned on the desk. "You're saying this connects to Vale?" "I'm saying it emanates from the same origin," Wolfe said. "The same meticulous hand that poisoned Vale has now declared its intent to engage me. This is not escalation born of panic. It is choreography. The poisoner seeks dialogue, an intellectual one." Kramer snorted. "You think a killer wants to talk to you?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that they already have." That ended the argument for the moment. Kramer took the envelope and left with his usual storm cloud demeanor, promising to have the lab tear it apart. When the door closed, Wolfe leaned back, exhaled through his nose, and muttered, "It will reveal nothing. They have calculated for that." The phone rang half an hour later. It was Saul Panzer. "Kells is on the move again," he said. "Left his apartment early, took a cab downtown, stopped at a print shop on Lexington. He's still inside." "A print shop," I repeated. Saul confirmed. Small place. Custom stationery, engraving, business cards. Want me to follow him after? Stay close, I said. Call me the second he leaves. When I relayed the information, Wolfe's brow twitched, which in his world was the equivalent of slamming a fist. Printing implies preparation, perhaps correspondence, perhaps something more theatrical. He paused, then added, Archie, call Miss Merle. Ask her to come here at 3 o'clock. Alone. Diana Merle arrived on time and without ornament. She looked tired, eyelids heavy, the crispness of her movements dulled by worry. Wolfe observed her for a full minute before speaking, letting the silence stretch thin. You are fond of Mr. Vale, he said at last. I respect him, she replied. You said that before, Wolfe murmured. You respect efficiency, not weakness, yet you remain loyal even as his enterprise crumbles. That is either admirable or self-serving. Her lips tightened. If you called me here to insult me, not at all, Wolfe interrupted. I called you because the structure of this sabotage required an insider with administrative reach, someone who could intercept deliveries, alter communications, and yet appear blameless. Miss Merle, I dislike redundancy. Tell me why I should not consider you central to this affair. Her hands clenched in her lap. Because I've been trying to stop it. Gordon wouldn't listen. He thought the letters were isolated, just rumors. I told him someone was manipulating shipments, but he said it was supplier error. By the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late. Too late for what? I asked. She hesitated. For Helen Jaspers. She disappeared last night. That hit hard enough that even Wolfe's composure faltered. Explain, he demanded. She was supposed to meet me at her apartment at 7. Never showed. Her phone's off, and this morning her assistant said she hasn't been seen since leaving the factory. Wolfe's voice turned grim. And you waited until now to mention it? I didn't know whom to trust, she said. I wasn't sure if the company was being watched, or if I was. Wolfe closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, the coldness had settled back in. Miss Merle, you will remain here until further notice. Mr. Goodwin will see to your comfort. If our adversary believes you still at large, it may draw him closer. She looked uncertain. You think he'll come here? Wolfe's tone was calm as a blade. He already has, Miss Merle. Twice. Her face went pale. I didn't argue the point. There wasn't anything to add. After she'd been shown to the guest room, Wolfe called Saul again. Saul, abandon Kells for now. Find Helen Jaspers. Start with her residence, then the Vale factory. Report at once if you find so much as an empty wrapper. When he hung up, I asked, You think Jaspers is dead? He stared at the window, the rain starting again in fine threads. If she is, then the poisoner has removed the only person who might have known the formula of his method. And if she is not, then she is the method. That last part I didn't like the sound of. He caught my look and added quietly, Archie, have Fritz prepare coffee. We will need endurance tonight. The next piece, as our adversary phrased it, is moving into place, and I intend to meet it before it strikes. The hours crawled after that like reluctant witnesses. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the patience of a mountain, eyes half shut but mind whirring behind them. I'd seen that look before. It meant he was building something intricate, a net of reasoning so tight it would strangle whoever tried wriggling through. Meanwhile, the brownstone felt heavier with Miss Merle upstairs, pacing occasionally, her heels marking out her nerves on the hardwood floor. Fritz brought her tea. She didn't drink it. By 8 o'clock, the phone rang again. Saul's voice came through, steady but lower than usual. Found her, Archie. Helen Jaspers. Dead. Warehouse near the East River, not far from Vale's factory. Looks staged, no signs of struggle. Paramedics say she's been gone maybe 12 hours. My stomach dropped, though I'd half expected it. Poison? Not sure yet. There's a half-eaten chocolate bar beside her hand. I didn't need to ask which kind. When I relayed it, Wolfe's lids didn't even flicker. He absorbed the words as if they were data points, not death. Of course, he murmured. A tidy equation demands symmetry. Vale first, then his creator. A show of completion, an artist signing his canvas. Artist, I said. You're making this guy sound civilized. He looked up sharply. Do not mistake refinement for morality, Archie. Our adversary kills with precision, not chaos. That makes him civilized, and therefore infinitely more dangerous. He gestured toward the phone. Call Kramer. Tell him where to find the body. Then prepare the car. We are going to Vale's factory. That one caught me off guard. You're going somewhere. Do not gawk. I'm compelled. The answers reside there, not here. By the time we reached the factory, it was close to 9. The building loomed dark and hollow, the rain giving it a greasy sheen. Saul met us out front, coat collar up, expression grave. Kramer's men have the river site cordoned off, he said. But get this. The factory's back door lock was broken from the inside. From the inside, I said. Yeah, like someone wanted to make it look like a break-in, but didn't care who noticed. Wolfe grunted, climbing out of the car, slower than a glacier, but steadier. Inside, the air was thick with sugar and something acrid underneath. Industrial solvents, or maybe deceit. The floor gleamed from recent cleaning, too clean. Whoever had been here wanted to erase footprints. Wolfe moved only a few paces before stopping, scanning the walls and counters like they were paragraphs to be read. He bent slightly, an event worth writing home about, and pointed to a small, dark stain under one of the stainless tables. Archie. I crouched. It wasn't blood. Chocolate, maybe, but darker, oily. Spilled compound. Not spilled, Wolfe said. Discarded. Someone testing mixture ratios. Helen Jaspers, perhaps, or her imitator. Saul had his flashlight out, sweeping the corners. You think she came here before she died? She came, Wolfe said quietly, to meet someone who promised her clarity. Instead, she received oblivion. The timing is too precise for coincidence. He turned to me. Archie, find Mr. Bender, the financial officer. Bring him here. Bender lived only a few blocks away, and I dragged him out of his apartment 10 minutes later, half-dressed, wild-eyed, protesting innocence before I'd said a word. Wolfe was waiting, arms folded, when we returned. Mr. Bender, he began, you signed off on a new procurement order last week, did you not? For experimental flavor compounds from a supplier in Newark. Bender blinked. Yes, but that was Gordon's instruction. He wanted to explore cost-effective blends. Lies, Wolfe snapped, his voice low but sharp enough to slice air. Those compounds were the base for the counterfeit chocolate, the same used to poison Vale. You authorized their purchase because someone persuaded you it would cover your losses. Who? No one. Wolfe took a step closer, his bulk commanding the entire room. Your balance sheets revealed discrepancies. Vale trusted you. That was his mistake. But theft was not your aim. Preservation was. You're terrified, Mr. Bender, because you've realized that whoever orchestrated this knows you falsified accounts to keep the company solvent. Bender's shoulders sagged. He said it would be temporary, just to shift the numbers till the new quarter. Who said? Wolfe's voice was quiet again, almost kind. Bender looked at me, then at Saul. Arthur Kells. Wolfe nodded, as if hearing confirmation of something he'd known for hours. Of course. Ambition dressed as artistry. Kells needed access, an accomplice, and a stage. He used you to fund his deception, Miss Jaspers to execute it, and Vale as his martyr. And now, realizing the scheme might unravel, he moves against us to silence inquiry. Then what now? I asked. Now, Wolfe said, we invite the puppeteer to his own unmasking. He turned toward the door, already issuing instructions in that deliberate rhythm that meant the trap was being set. "Archie, call Kramer. Have him bring Mr. Kells here within the hour. Tell him the investigation requires clarification and that I insist upon his presence. By the end of this night, we will close this confectionery farce for good." Outside, the rain thickened, smearing the factory windows into mirrors, and in one of them I could almost swear I saw Wolfe's reflection. Not smug or satisfied, but grim, as though even victory would taste bitter. It took Kramer 30 minutes to arrive, which, considering the weather and his opinion of Wolfe, was practically a sprint. When he entered the factory office, the first thing he saw was Wolfe, seated heavily in a steel chair that looked like it feared for its life, and the second was Bender, hunched and trembling, looking like a confession waiting for punctuation. Kramer grunted, took off his hat, and tossed it onto a nearby table. "This better be worth dragging me through a river, Wolfe," he said. "It will be," Wolfe replied, his tone as cool as cellar air. "You have your murderer, Inspector, though not yet your confession. Arthur Kells will arrive shortly. He believes himself summoned for procedural clarification." Kramer narrowed his eyes. "And you plan to ambush him with one of your word games?" Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. "If I can expose a killer without leaving this chair, Inspector, I consider that a public service." He gestured toward Bender, who was clutching a handkerchief like it might keep him anchored. "Mr. Bender has kindly confirmed that Kells engineered a financial deception to mask embezzlement within Vale Chocolatery. It was not theft for pleasure, but necessity, to fund an elaborate campaign of sabotage. Kells planted the counterfeit chocolates, wrote the anonymous letters, and ensured that both Vale and Miss Jaspers became his casualties. One to ruin the business, the other to erase his accomplice." Kramer gave a snort. "You're guessing." "I do not guess," Wolfe said sharply. "I infer, and you shall see the inference validated momentarily." Right on cue, Saul appeared in the doorway, ushering Arthur Kells into the room. Kells looked more irritated than nervous, which told me two things. He didn't know how close the trap was, and he'd underestimated Wolfe. A fatal combination. "Gentlemen," Kells said, glancing around the dim office, "if this is about Gordon's accounts, I've already spoken to the auditors. There's nothing irregular." "Sit," Wolfe said. The single word carried more weight than a gavel. Kells hesitated, then obeyed. Wolfe studied him for a full 10 seconds before speaking again. "Mr. Kells, I admire competence. You've displayed a certain crude version of it. Unfortunately, competence without conscience is unpalatable. I don't have to sit here and be insulted. You don't have to breathe either," Wolfe said mildly. "But I advise it. Inspector Kramer, would you kindly produce the envelope Mr. Goodwin delivered earlier?" Kramer handed it over. Wolfe turned it toward Kells. "This was delivered to my home last evening. The note inside read, 'The next piece is yours.' A curious choice of phrasing, wouldn't you say? It implies not just authorship, but artistry. It is, in tone and rhythm, identical to the promotional copy your agency released for Noir Sublime 3 months ago. I recall the tagline distinctly, 'Each piece tells a story.'" Kells's face tightened, but he kept his tone smooth. "Coincidence." "Coincidence," Wolfe echoed softly. "You mistake inevitability for coincidence. The same Remington typeface, the same misaligned E, the same stationery as Vale's internal memoranda, all traceable to your department." Kramer stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "You can prove that?" Wolfe nodded once. "Mr. Goodwin collected the evidence. Miss Merle verified it when she arrived at my house. Kells used the company's own resources to craft his deceptions, a touch of irony I find both fitting and grotesque." Kells's composure began to fray. "You can't prove I poisoned anyone. You've got speculation and theatrics." Wolfe leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "You made one mistake, Mr. Kells. You assumed Miss Jaspers would remain loyal after the poisoning of Vale. She didn't. She contacted Miss Merle and arranged to meet her last night, intending to confess your role. You silenced her before she could speak. The counterfeit bar by her body was your signature, a final flourish. You are an aesthete of deceit, but your vanity betrayed you. Kells stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. This is insane. You've got nothing but words. Kramer moved like a bulldog, blocking the exit. Yeah? Then let's take you downtown and see what the lab finds on your hands, pal. If Wolfe's right, there'll be enough cocoa residue to open your own shop. Kells's eyes darted between them, calculating, then his shoulders slumped. He ruined me, he muttered. Vale promised me partnership, then froze me out, said I wasn't pure enough for his brand. So I gave him impurity, perfectly wrapped. There it was, the break Wolfe had been waiting for. The silence afterward was thick enough to chew. Kramer read Kells his rights, while Saul and I stood by the door. When they led him out, Wolfe exhaled, sinking deeper into the chair as if his body had just remembered its weight. An unpleasant man, he said finally. Ambition, untempered by intellect, breeds vulgarity. I grinned. Still, you've got to hand it to him. He nearly pulled it off. Nearly, Wolfe said, closing his eyes. A word that distinguishes competence from mastery. Fritz, we will dine late tonight. The taste of this business lingers unpleasantly. Archie, see that the door's locked. I've no wish for further guests. When I returned a few minutes later, he was already reaching for the beer I'd left on his desk. He raised it slightly, like a toast, and said, "To purity, Archie. In craft, if not in character. The world seldom allows both." I couldn't argue with that. Outside, the rain finally stopped, and, for once, the brownstone was still. By the next morning, the brownstone had begun its slow return to equilibrium. The rain had finally cleared, sunlight touching the orchids upstairs and stretching pale gold through the office windows. Fritz moved quietly about, trying to restore some sense of culinary normalcy, while I handled the paperwork that always followed a Wolfe case, the kind of bureaucratic debris Kramer liked to scatter in our path when Wolfe made him look like an extra in his own investigation. Wolfe, meanwhile, was at his desk, reviewing his notes from the night before, his expression one of measured dissatisfaction. It wasn't the case that troubled him, it was the manner of it. For all his intellectual appetite, Wolfe disliked victories that tasted of bitterness, and this one, steeped in vanity, betrayal, and poisoned chocolate, was a dish he'd rather not have ordered. When I finished typing up the last page of my report, I leaned back. "So that's that," I said. "Vale lives, Kells confesses, Bender spills, and Kramer leaves here muttering about how you should have been born a cop but missed the moral requirement. Everyone gets what they deserve, more or less." Wolfe's eyes stayed on his notepad. "Desert is seldom symmetrical, Archie. Mr. Vale may recover, but his enterprise will not. His sister will inherit nothing but scandal. The others, Merle, Bender, will nurse guilt or fear as long as they breathe. Justice, such as it is, leaves debris." "Debris is still better than corpses," I said, "and for what it's worth, you were right from the start. It wasn't about money. It was about ego." "Of course," he murmured. "Greed is banal. Ego has imagination." He shut his notebook with a soft thud. "We are done." But I wasn't convinced. Something about Kells's confession hadn't settled right with me. The timing, the neatness. It had all come too easily. I'd been in this business long enough to know that the guilty don't usually gift-wrap themselves unless someone else is pulling the string. I said, "You ever notice how Kells didn't flinch when you accused him of sending the note to you? He only reacted when you tied him to Jasper's death." Wolfe looked up at that, and I could see the glint of interest stirring again. "You imply the note came from another hand." "I'm saying it fits his style, but not his purpose," I replied. By the time that envelope showed up, Kells was too busy covering his tracks to taunt anyone. He didn't want attention. He wanted distance. Wolfe didn't answer right away. He drummed his fingers on the desk, the rhythm slow, deliberate. Then he said, "Fetch the envelope from Kramer's office. Do not tell him why. Merely insist I require it for clarification of testimony." That was Wolfe's version of a field trip. It took me 2 hours and 3 rounds of verbal fencing with Kramer, who finally handed it over with the kind of look that would have curdled milk. When I got back, Wolfe had rearranged his desk with military precision, the magnifier already waiting. He examined the note again, holding it near the light. "Observe," he said quietly. "The typeface is the same, yes, but the paper grain differs from the others we collected at Vale's. Finer, higher quality, imported, likely European. That mean anything?" "It means," Wolfe said, "that whoever sent this possesses refinement and proximity to me, someone aware of my habits, perhaps my vulnerabilities. You think one of them followed you?" "I think," he said slowly, "that the note was not a threat. It was an invitation." I blinked. "From who?" He met my gaze. "From someone who wished to measure me, to test whether Nero Wolfe could be manipulated by intrigue alone." It hit me then, the unsettling possibility. The saboteur had played his part, but someone else had played both of us. I felt a cold thread trace my spine. "You're saying there's still another hand behind all this?" "Perhaps not behind," Wolfe said. "Beside. The letter's timing suggests foreknowledge of Kells's actions, someone who wanted the play to reach its climax and ensured that I would attend the performance." "Any suspects?" He gave a thin smile. "Always, but speculation without proof is vulgar." He folded the letter carefully, placing it in his drawer. "For now, Archie, we will let this one linger. Some adversaries are worth the wait." I knew better than to argue when his tone turned philosophical. I left him there, the sunlight creeping across his desk, the orchids blooming above in their humid silence. Fritz called us to lunch, and by the time I returned, Wolfe had already moved on, nose deep in his book, as though the whole affair had been nothing more than a mildly diverting essay in human folly. But later that night, as I was heading to my room, I passed the office again. The lights were low, the air still, and on the desk, the letter lay open once more. Wolfe was staring at it, eyes unreadable. For a man who never left his chair, he looked strangely alert, almost expectant. "Archie," he said softly, not looking up, "if there is a sequel to this farce, it will not be written by Arthur Kells." And then he closed the drawer, locking it with a quiet click that sounded to me a lot like a promise. It started with a sound. Just after midnight, when the brownstone should have been sealed tight and silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and Wolfe's measured breathing 2 floors up, there was a whisper of movement, a soft scrape like paper against glass. I'd been at my desk, pretending to finish the day's notes, but mostly replaying Wolfe's last line in my head. "If there is a sequel to this farce." He didn't say things like that lightly. When you've lived long enough around Nero Wolfe, you learn that every sentence is weighted, often with something sharp underneath. I got up quietly, crossed the office, and checked the front hall. Nothing. But the faint smell of rain and cold air hung in the air, recent enough to raise the hairs on my arms. I opened the door, half expecting one of Kramer's boys, or maybe Saul, but the stoop was empty, except for an envelope tucked neatly between the iron bars of the gate. For a second, I considered leaving it there. But curiosity has been the death of more than one good man, and I've never claimed to be immune. I pulled it free and turned it under the porch light. The envelope was identical to the last one. Same thick paper, same clean fold, same neat type. My stomach gave a slow, deliberate turn. This time, the note inside was shorter. The game was pleasant. The next begins soon. I stood there for a long minute, listening to the city breathe beyond the gate. Then I locked up and went back inside. Wolfe was waiting in his robe, which meant he'd heard me open the door. You don't sneak past Wolfe any more than you sneak past sunrise. He didn't ask what was in my hand. He simply said, "It has arrived." I handed it to him without a word. He unfolded it, read, and gave the smallest nod, as though confirming an unpleasant expectation. "So," he murmured, "our author persists." I watched him, trying to gauge whether he was angry or intrigued. It's a narrow line with Wolfe. His version of excitement could look a lot like disdain. "You think it's the same sender?" I asked. Indubitably. The phrasing bears identical cadence, the same precision in brevity. A mind that delights in formality, artistry, and control. But there is something altered, an expansion of tone. The first letter was confrontation. This one is promise. Promise of what? Of continuation, he said. A sequel, as I suggested. One does not end correspondence with Nero Wolfe when one has tasted its flavor. Sounds like he's flirting, I said. Wolfe gave me a glower that could have curdled milk. "Archie, confine your levity to matters less lethal. Whoever this is seeks not affection, but engagement, an intellectual duel. The previous case was only the overture." I poured myself a small drink. "So what's the plan? You wait for him to make the next move?" He considered that. To pursue him now would be futile. He reveals himself only when it pleases him, and I do not chase phantoms, but rest assured, he will return. He desires an audience, and I am the only one worth his trouble. He stood then, slowly, deliberately, as if the motion itself carried weight. "Archie, tomorrow you will visit Gordonvale. If he is awake, question him, not about Kells, but about his early investors, his suppliers, his competitors. Somewhere in that network, this shadow has roots. Think it's business revenge? Possibly. Or something subtler. Jealousy of intellect. Envy of craftsmanship. The person who writes such letters does not covet profit. He covets recognition." I jotted it down out of habit. Wolfe returned to his chair, settling like an anchor into deep water. He studied the note again, then folded it precisely and placed it beside the first in his drawer. "Two notes, Archie. The beginning and the prelude to continuation. He toys with me, but toys reveal their maker if observed long enough." He didn't speak again for a while. I stayed in the room, pretending to sort files, but watching him instead. The way his fingers traced the edge of the envelope told me he was already 10 moves ahead, imagining his opponent's structure, the next gambit, the inevitable slip. The next morning, I went to Mount Sinai. Vale was conscious, pale as parchment, his voice thin but coherent. He didn't remember much after the collapse, just the taste of bitterness and a face he couldn't place. "Not Kells," he said. He was gone by then. "Someone else, a man in the shadows near the door, watching me." I pressed for details, but he shook his head. It wasn't fear I felt. It was familiarity. That word bothered me all the way back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I returned, surrounded by orchids as if they were his private jury. I gave him Vale's statement, and he listened, expression unreadable. "Familiarity," he repeated. "Yes, that aligns with my suspicion. Our adversary knows us both, not personally, but philosophically. Vale, the artisan obsessed with purity. Myself, the mind addicted to perfection. Both prideful, both isolated. It is a mirror game, Archie. He reflects his subjects before dismantling them." I said, "If that's true, then you're next on his list." He looked at me then, eyes calm, even amused. He already told us so. "The next begins soon." What he does not realize, however, is that I do not lose in my own house. That night he ordered the locks changed, instructed Fritz not to accept deliveries, and had me check the phones twice. It wasn't fear driving him, it was calculation. He was preparing the field. As I turned off the lights before bed, I passed the office one last time. The drawer where he'd locked the letters was shut, but I could see the faint outline of their presence, two slim ghosts waiting to be joined by a third. Wolfe's silhouette was still visible through the frosted glass, unmoving. If you ask me, that was the moment the game truly started. And judging by the look on his face, I wasn't sure who was playing whom anymore. It began the way most endings do, with silence. Not the comfortable kind Wolfe cultivated like an art form, but the kind that sits on your shoulders and makes you wonder what's waiting just beyond hearing. The two letters lay on Wolfe's desk like relics from a private war, and for once even the orchids upstairs seemed subdued, as if the house itself was holding its breath. It was 3 days since the second note had arrived. The locks were changed, Fritz was practically frisking the milkman, and Wolfe hadn't left the office except to tend to his plants. I'd seen him brood before, but this was different, tighter. He wasn't thinking about who anymore. He was thinking about why. That afternoon, just after lunch, Saul Panzer showed up unannounced, which meant he'd found something worth cutting short a job for. "Got a trail, Wolfe," he said as soon as he stepped inside. "Found a post office box rented under a fake name, Harold Klein, paid in cash, used for one outgoing package in the last month. Matches the drop pattern of your mystery letters." Wolfe didn't move. And Saul handed me a slip of paper. Mail clerk remembered the man, said he was quiet, well-spoken, early 50s, wore gloves, didn't seem nervous. More like he was amused. "Amused," Wolfe repeated softly. "Did the clerk describe his appearance?" Saul nodded. "Tall, grey hair, neat mustache, walked with a cane. Said he looked like an academic." Something clicked. I glanced at Wolfe, and he already knew where my mind had gone. He sighed. "Archie, summon Mr. Vale's medical records. Specifically, the names of his attending physicians." I made the call. When I returned, Wolfe was pacing, slowly, ponderously, like a bear testing the weight of a bridge. He stopped only when I said, "Vale's attending physician was Dr. Harmon Krell. Neurologist, mid-50s, grey hair, walks with a cane after a car accident 5 years ago." Wolfe's voice dropped. "Of course." Saul frowned. "You know him?" "I know of him," Wolfe said. "A man of considerable intellect and wounded vanity. He published a paper on cognitive response to chemical stimuli, a study Vale appropriated, without credit, for a marketing presentation 2 years ago. I recall reading the journal. I felt the air change, like the final piece snapping into place. So Krell's the puppet master. "Indeed," Wolfe said. "He sought retribution not through murder, but through humiliation, poisoning Vale's body as Vale had poisoned his work. The counterfeit chocolate, the letters, the carefully staged deaths, his creation of a moral experiment. When I intervened, he extended the game to me." He looked at Saul. "Where is he now?" "Office uptown," Saul said. "You want him brought here?" "No," Wolfe replied. "I will summon him." An hour later, Krell stood in our office, calm, refined, dressed like a man who ironed his thoughts before speaking. He smiled faintly at Wolfe, a thin curve of lips that didn't touch his eyes. "You've been expecting me." "I have," Wolfe said. "You may sit, though I doubt it will comfort you." Krell took the red chair. "You're not angry. Interesting. Most men would be." "Anger is wasted on those already condemned by their own intellect," Wolfe said. "You considered yourself righteous, yes? Vale's theft of your work justified your retaliation. You wished to expose corruption, his and by extension, mine. You sought to test whether morality could survive contamination. Krell's smile deepened. You understand me, then? Perfectly, Wolfe said. But you erred, Doctor. You mistook intellect for immunity. You played your experiment through others, Kells, Bender, Jaspers, and when it collapsed, you reached beyond your grasp. You sought to ensnare me, to prove that even I could be lured into your moral theater. You failed. Krell leaned forward slightly. Failed? I engaged your mind, didn't I? You're speaking to me now because I made you curious. Curiosity, Wolfe said, is not victory. Curiosity is the prelude to eradication. He pressed the buzzer. Kramer stepped in, 2 detectives behind him. He'd been waiting in the kitchen since Saul tipped him off. Wolfe gestured to Krell. Inspector, this is your author. His letters and poisons will match his research materials. You will find the compounds in his laboratory on 72nd Street. Krell didn't resist. He simply rose and looked at Wolfe one last time. You solved it, but you don't understand it. Vale's corruption deserved exposure. He stole thought. I simply gave him a taste of himself. Wolfe regarded him coldly. No, Doctor. You mistook justice for indulgence. They are rarely the same flavor. When the door closed behind them, silence returned, clean and heavy. I poured 2 drinks, brandy this time, and set one by Wolfe's elbow. Well, I said, that's that. You've been tested, and you passed. I'd say that makes you the undefeated champion of moral chess. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, it makes me nothing but what I was, an observer of human folly, and therefore its accomplice. Accomplice? I asked. He took a sip, eyes distant. Every time I understand a man like Krell, Archie, I feel I share in his design. Understanding is not absolution. Maybe not, I said, but it beats ignorance. He almost smiled. A dubious improvement. Fritz will serve dinner at 8. You may tell him we will have the soufflé. He picked up his book, opened it, and with that gesture the case of dark chocolate, darker secrets, closed itself neatly around us. Outside, the world kept moving. No fanfare, no trumpets, just the ordinary hum of life returning to its patterns. And as always, Nero Wolfe sat in his chair, full of intellect and appetite, while I filed the notes and turned out the light. If there was a moral to it all, he didn't say it aloud. But I knew what it would be. Even the purest flavors, left too long to ferment, will turn bitter, 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 will turn bitter.